Well, I think the U.S. perception about China in Africa is that China is predatory. That China is a predatory lender, and China is a predatory state, trying to prey on vulnerable African economies and vulnerable African states, especially given their desire for foreign financing to support their domestic infrastructure projects. So I think the narrative has been quite clear that China has been exploiting the weaknesses or the demand or the need for foreign investment by African countries, and China is trying to use these vulnerabilities to expand its influence and also to expand its military presence on the African continent. And that is identified as a major problem because it's not only undermining the effort of the United States to strengthen democratic institutions in Africa, it also affects the real security on the ground. So when you look at China establishing its first naval base or naval supply support center in Djibouti, I think all those are taken into consideration. But from the Chinese perspective, I think the question is very different. So from the Chinese perspective, the African countries have a need, and China has a supply, and the two sides are bargaining. Are basically bargaining transactional businesses deals in terms of the infrastructure development or the loan that China provides to Africa. So from the Chinese perspective, they would like to see this as a fair trade deal or fair economic deals that in the end, the African countries will have to be more disciplined and have to be better informed about their decisions to reach deals with China. But for the Chinese, they see these deals as negotiated between Chinese government and African governments. They are commercial contracts to be implemented. So there might be future strategic or political ramifications for the African countries. But it's for the African countries to say no to China. It's not for the United States to say no to China on Africa's behalf. So which is why that I think on this issue that who's right or who's wrong, I think African opinions should matter. African opinions in the end should be the most important criteria when we use to evaluate these relationships. Because by the end of the day, if Africa have a need and only the Chinese has a supply, then for US to criticize the Chinese intention is not going to be welcomed by the African countries, unless we can somehow convince the African countries that, well, you are getting into very bad deals with China. But in those cases, the answer that we get back a lot from African countries is that, well, will you give us a better deal? And if you don't have a better alternative for us to choose from, then all this bad mouthing or the criticism on China, we understand where you come from, but we still do not have a viable alternative.